welcome all of you viewers joining us from out there and those online. We're coming to you live from Sheraton Kampala Hotel, and this afternoon we're discussing SMEs and COVID-19, the crisis. They have been hit hard, and we're here to discuss how they can be assisted. This is going to be a discussion of solutions, and on the same event, we are going to, there's going to be a launch also of a project that is going to embark on a research to find out the actual effects on the SMEs, MSMEs actually, including micro, small and medium enterprises, and what can be done for them going forward. This is the e-conference, and it is organized by the International Development Research Center, IDRC, and Economic Policy Research Center, EPRC, research and economics, and they're rightly placed to be discussing these issues. We will have a panel discussion a little bit later, and but first we'll listen to two presentations from colleagues who are joining us from Canada and also Nairobi. In the room tonight, this afternoon, we have a number of people who we're looking forward to hear from. Mr. Gideon Badagawa, who is the Executive Director for Private Sector Foundation. Mr. Richard Jabo, Principal Economist and Minister of Finance. Dr. Bib Francis, Chief Economist, UDB, Uganda Development Bank, very interesting person in the room. We also have Dr. Sarah Sewanyana, who is the Executive Director, Economic Policy Research Center in Uganda. And of course, online, we have Dr. Paul Okwi, who is the Senior Program Specialist, International Development Research Center in Nairobi. And of course, we have also Dr. Ajan Dihan, who is joining us from Canada, who is the Director of IDRC, Inclusive Economies Program, International Development Research Center. We were going to listen to those two gentlemen who are joining us from out there. To start us off, we shall invite Dr. Paul Okwi. Dr. Paul, can you hear me? From Nairobi?
Yes, Samuel, I can hear you.
Very nice.
Good afternoon, good everybody.
Good afternoon. We are going to listen to you first, and you're going to speak to us on the role of evidence in identifying MSMEs and informing the design measures of the government response. In a nutshell, evidence from research to inform policy towards MSMEs. Dr. Okwi, you have the floor, and you have 6 minutes. Dr. Okwi, please.
Thank you, Samuel, and good afternoon from Nairobi. I'll go straight to the subject issue, that is the role of evidence in identifying SMEs and also how evidence can be used to inform policy. To kick off my discussion, basically, it's time we realize that governments ensure that policy is driven by evidence and reasoning. And we need this research that we generate to be translated into action. So evidence in this case, we are basically relying on data which is collected and analyzed, and this transforms into information. Once the information is applied to problems, then we get the evidence. Now, in the context of the micro, small, and medium enterprises, we know that COVID-19 has hit the sector hardest in terms of employment, in terms of income and other opportunities that most of these people were benefiting from the economy. So the worst affected groups, of course, are the vendors, the self-employed, the hawkers, the construction and transport sectors. However, we know that government, like other governments in the region, stepped in to support this and introduced a number of financial and safety measures. But in order to understand the impact of these measures, we need data, we need evidence. And in our case, we don't have a very comprehensive data set of the MSMEs in Uganda to support our policy formulation. Of course, we do realize that there are surveys that have been done in the past, but the challenge is that most of the micro and small enterprises are informal, and millions of these are located in various parts of the country. We have different players that have supported government in terms of generating this information. But the challenge is there are so many that employ or that are owner managed or self-employed and not registered. And these are more than 90% of the enterprises that we're talking about. So we could use trade unions, we could use retail associations, we could use local authorities to identify this. But we do not have these systems well entrenched, we don't have the structures. This poses a big problem. And I would like to say that currently the problem is not the money. We can see several governments have injected lots of money. The problem is we need the evidence to support direction of the targeted measures to these sectors. Now, COVID has presented a very interesting scenario, a very interesting window of opportunity for evidence to influence policy making, because several governments realize that they have been responding based on anecdotal evidence or observation. But to reach out to these groups, they need to be evidence, they need to be data. And yet we do realize that there is a complex relation between evidence and application to policy. So if government has to reach out to these groups, first of all, it has to figure out how it will ensure that the relief gets to the target. And yet we don't see an end in sight of the virus. We are only hoping that systems that are currently existing will be helpful in terms of identifying the MSMEs and then driving home the relief measures. This is really a very big challenge in our case. In East Africa, in Uganda especially, we are likely to see the bigger enterprises, medium enterprises benefiting more than the small enterprises. So the initiative that I see taken up by Eprc should be one of those that will be helping us to identify these MSMEs. First of all, we need the evidence to define the issues. What are the issues that these MSMEs are facing? We need the evidence to shape their agendas. We need the evidence to identify the options that government has presented and how to deliver them. And then we need to monitor and analyze the impact and outcomes. Now, all this cannot be done if the evidence that we have is not reliable, if it is not robust, if it is politically not neutral, if the evidence is not rigorous or substantive, if it is not timely. In this case, COVID needs a timely response. If it is not actionable. So the evidence must also be easy to understand. And we also need to look at what is the relationship of the evidence that we're generating in terms of development policy, development planning and processes. Are the communities involved? Often we see evidence from, policies designing top-down approach, and the implementers are the communities. But in this case, we need to get the communities involved. Are the structures functioning in terms of ensuring that there is uptake of this evidence? So this situation that we're facing in Uganda currently, the economic lockdown, is putting us into a very challenging environment. And I would like to note that having evidence or having evidence-based policy in place does not guarantee that the interventions will be implemented. And we all know this in our countries, that most of the policies have technically been designed based on evidence. The biggest challenge is the need to put in place deliberate measures to translate these policy actions into, the policy into actions. And again, just to crown it, I would like to say that without the evidence, it's going to be very difficult, very, very difficult for us to assess the impact of government support to this sector during the pandemic and beyond. So it's high time that we reflected on the need for evidence, and for the COVID challenge, this is going to be an example for other interventions that countries like Uganda and other developing countries are faced with, that we need to unearth this information use this information to design the interventions, and then understand the implications in terms of the context before we can actually implement them. And finally, we need to do an impact assessment. We do not need to intervene alone. We need to do an impact assessment, and this is what will guide the future interventions. Thank you, Samuel.
Thank you, Dr. Paul Okwi, and for keeping time. You set us on a good pace. We are determined to keep time this evening and yet deliver the message. Thank you very much. We now want to, maybe before we go to Dr. Arjan Dihan in Canada, some facts. The Eprc report recently projects that if COVID-19 persists for the next 6 months, 3.8 million workers will lose their jobs temporarily, while 0.6 million would lose their employment permanently. And I think the 6 months have gone down the road, so perhaps it's already happening. And speaking of SME, over 75% of employees projected to lose their jobs forever are from the service sector and mainly from Kampala. Still on SMEs, according to a report by Uganda Investment Authority, more than 2.5 million people are employed in MSMEs, which comprise approximately 90% of the entire private sector. So we are justified to be having this discussion this afternoon. Let's move on now to Dr. Arjan Dihan, Director of IDRC on Inclusive Economies Program, and is based in Canada. He's going to speak to us about social and economic recovery and response from COVID-19 initiatives by IDRC. Dr. Ian, are you there?
I'm there, Sam. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
You have 7 minutes, Doctor. Please, you have our attention.
I promise I will be shorter than that, Sam, because I'm very keen to listen to the discussion. Indeed, the facts that you've already mentioned about the impact of the current situations are striking. Thanks also to Paul for introducing that debate. I want first of all to thank Eprc. I want to thank Sarah Swanyanana for organizing this, for the research that is being started. It is fabulous. It's great to share this panel with so many of distinguished speakers, scholars, policymakers, international organizations. Of course, I can't see you all, but the panel that's put together. Thank you so much for joining, and of course, particularly also the Honourable Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives. I don't know if Honourable Amelia Kiambade is already in the room, but thank you for the interest in this. On behalf of Canada's International Development Research Centre, I just want to thank you for this collaboration. IDRC in response, many of you know IDRC well, in response to the outbreak of the global pandemic, and unfortunately we see that the spread of the infections in your country remains relatively low, and that's great news. But at the same time, as your research already shows, the EPRC research already shows, the measures that were necessary to address this health crisis is having enormous impact on all economic activities. And of course, and we've seen that in Canada as much as anywhere else, of course, we immediately need to think about, and Paul highlighted this, that different groups are impacted differently. Sitting here in Canada, being well connected to everybody here, the impact on me is obviously very different from owners of small enterprises that are limited by all sorts of things. So because of this concern about the economic impact that we expect will continue to impact economies around the world, and because of the concern that particularly vulnerable groups are differently impacted and need different types of policy, again, as Paul already highlighted. Immediately after the outbreak of the pandemic becoming global, IDRC mobilized its resources and reached out to our partners that we've worked with, like EPRC, and and discuss the possibilities of support to provide the evidence that's needed in this crisis. And we were delighted to see how EPRC, that was already at the working on providing the evidence, looking to inform policy, that we formed that collaboration. This support is a global support. We're currently working with about 40 organizations, or more than some 50 organizations in 40 countries around the world. We think that EPRC, apart from informing of national policy, also we're looking forward to the contribution that this research project and your work will make for that global learning, and we are connecting all those researchers in a unique platform of global learning that is absolutely necessary at this point of time, where we're looking to help quickly spread the knowledge, not only the Uganda specific on the context, but also to learn from other countries, to see which policies might be relevant for countries, and again, what lessons from Uganda might be relevant for other countries. That was the broader initiatives. Like I said, we were delighted to be able to start this collaboration with EPRC. And as I said before, the thematic of this, the impact that the measures and the pandemic more broadly is having on small and medium enterprises, that indeed employs so many people in your country, is absolutely critical. And equally, we hope and we know that this research will able to track the impact and be able to help change, improve, measure the impact of the various policies that are being in place. So with that, Sam, back to you. Thank you so much for hosting this. It's great to be able to join you for the opening. And on behalf of IDRC, I wish the project all success.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ian Dihan, for your address. And it sets us off well this afternoon into our panel discussion. The panel is already seated there. Panel, please allow me stay here for the different roles that I'm playing this afternoon. But we're going to have a discussion of about 20 minutes. And we're going to be discussing evidence and inclusiveness. On my extreme left, I don't know what you on TV you are seeing, but extreme left, gentleman with a maroon mask is Mr. Abib Francis, Chief Economist, Uganda Development Bank. You're welcome. Next to him is Mr. Gideon Badagawa, not unknown to many of us, and is the Executive Director, Private Sector Foundation, Uganda. You're welcome, Gideon. Next to Gideon is Dr. Sarah Sewanyana, who is the Executive Director, Economic Policy Research Center, the other organizers for this discussion this afternoon. And lastly, we have Mr. Richard Jabo, Principal Economist at Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Finance indeed ought to be around. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. So let's start with Mr. Bibb. Mr. Bibb, UDB is at the center of the stimulus package. That's government responding to the private sector. We want to understand what kind of package do you have, speaking about the stimulus even, for MSMEs, particularly in relation to the COVID-19 recovery?
Thank you, moderator. Now, as UDB, being a development bank for the country, I think this is the time when our relevancy is very critical. Because this is the time, economists call it the time of downturn or bust, when there's a crisis. And that's when a DFI plays a very critical role. So as a bank, of course we also have limitations. As a bank, we are focusing on how do we revive the economy. And also, How do you revive the economy even beyond COVID? Because there are a lot of lessons we have learned from this. There are certain commodities we feel are very essential for this country. And supposing there was a complete lockdown where the borders were closed and we had to rely on what is within the country, how would we have survived? If you have no salt, if you have no sugar, if you have no medicine, if those essential things are lacking. So this is how we are looking at the future. So our greatest focus, of course, we have the key sectors of the economy, which of course is aligned to the government NDP3 and Vision 2040 focus areas. But the critical areas which we have identified, and we have learned a lot of lessons from this impact of COVID, and of course the measures taken to stave the impact of COVID, which is in fact created a lot of challenges, is areas of industry and agriculture. Those are very key areas which we are putting a lot of effort. Of course, there are other areas which are also important. Trade, tourism is also an area we are focusing a lot on. So really, industrialization and agriculture is one of the key areas which we are focusing on, and we are putting a lot of resources on that, because we realize that if we can industrialize, we can solve a lot of problems which is facing this country. First of all, foreign exchange. If we add value, we can get a better foreign exchange. If we industrialize, we can provide gainful employment to our people. And if we industrialize, it has some backward and forward linkages into agriculture, because most of the inputs to our industries come from agriculture. So you promote agriculture, you provide employment, you promote services and other related sectors. So we thought if we focus on industry, this would really help to solve some of the problems in the economy. And even the issue of structural poverty. If you industrialize, you provide gainful employment, you are going to solve the problem of poverty, which is in the country. I think that is what I can say for now.
Absolutely. Before I leave you and move to Mr. Badagawa, inclusiveness, gender issues, maybe scale of business, how is that being tackled from the standpoint of UDB and intervention, especially with COVID?
There is something we have been doing, but we want to enhance it further. For a DFI, we are not like commercial banks. For us, the assessment of development impact is very, very important in any of the intervention we undertake. In other words, when I talk about development impact, I talk about how does the project you finance help to impact on the youth? How does it help to impact on women and other vulnerable groups? How does it provide employment? How does it help the country to earn foreign exchange? How does it impact on the GDP of the country? How does it impact on the distribution of wealth in the country? These are key things which we are at the top of our assessment for any project we select for financing. That's why you see now, with the COVID now, we have even gone further and said, let's design special products for women. And that is one of the strategic initiatives we are on now. Let's design specific products for youth, because youth forms the biggest percentage of the population. You leave them out, you have not distributed wealth. So that is what we are focusing on now. It's on top of our strategic focus.
If Dr. Sawanyana was to, offer you, Dr. Sawanyana was to offer you research, evidence, what would you require from her so that you do your job better, especially speaking of the stimulus?
I would look for, one thing I would look for as a DFI is, what are the development potential in the country, different areas of the country? Then two, what is the overall poverty profile for the country, different areas? What are the level of, the details of the poverty? Once you give me those two data, the potential in that area and the poverty level in that area, my intervention will focus on first areas of high poverty and what are the opportunities there which I need to exploit for development, which will impact on those people. Of course, there are other data, but those are the first two things I would require.
Well spoken, and it looks like you need to engage more. Dr. Sawanyana there has given you a cue. Let's move to Mr. Gideon Badagawa, Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. What have you done as PSFU to help MSMEs to remain resilient towards recovery, speaking of COVID-19?
Thank you very much, Samuel, and my appreciation to the organizers IDRC and Eprc for this meeting, just one in a series of them since COVID COVID came in. But you see, Samuel, when you talk about growth, and the private sector leads growth, when you talk about growth, you are talking about many aspects of growth, ranging from output to employment and many other factors. And the evidence is very clear. Research has been taken, and we have the evidence. And I'm happy about the very first presenter, really emphasizing the aspect of evidence. Let's listen to research, let's listen to evidence, let's listen to reason, and not sentiments. As I said, this is only one in a series of these such meetings. And I think we in the private sector are saying one thing. Can policy makers, people who are in policy formulation, wake up the challenge that COVID is bringing to us now? That is going to be very important, so that it's not rhetoric. When you talk about MSMEs, and someone, I think the very first speaker, mentioned the informal sector, 90%, 80 to 90% of these SMEs are in the informal setting. They don't know what to do. We don't know who they employ. We don't know what they are producing, where they are selling, where the markets are, and so on and so forth. And the challenge for MSMEs, indeed, if one could just put it in a nutshell, it's about liquidity, it's about skills, it's about finding markets. Finding markets means you must have the capacity to respond to the expectations of that market in terms of volumes, standards, etc., etc. Now, these are the challenges that we wake up to today in the time of COVID. The challenge that we have is that many businesses are beginning to shut down. And I think you alluded to that. 3.8 million jobs are on the line, 1.6 of them directly. This speaks to a policymaker. What is it that we must do to make sure that we save these enterprises? So we are talking about the survival of enterprises, and we are talking about resuscitation of the enterprises. We are talking about growth of these enterprises. We can't talk about growth until they are able to come afloat. Now, coming afloat means that we have that requisite stimulus package. Now, the requisite stimulus package, and that's, I'm very excited about my neighbor on the left here, the Uganda Development Bank. We were very excited through the budget. 1 trillion, yes, it's small money, but it's big, especially if it's focused on MSMEs. So the question that is continued to linger is whether this money is going to be focused on the micro, small, and medium enterprises, and not necessarily on the large enterprises. And what does it take for us to focus these resources on those little enterprises? What is the criteria? How prepared must they be? We are talking about an informal sector. Some of them are not registered. You cannot keep dishing money, and banks know that, to individuals that are not registered, don't have a business plan, don't have a viable proposal, and so on and so on. How do we prepare them? So business development support is critically important, especially for the young ones that are starting, that just started and then COVID came through and are near collapse. What is it that we must do? So training, capacity engagement, skills, and so on and so forth.
Gideon, I want to interrupt you before I forget this question. Again, Dr. Sawanya is sitting on your right. This is researchers meeting business people. What kind of research would you want as PSFU from her Eprc?
I think I would zero down on 3 things. What does the private sector want? The private sector wants markets. That's the first thing. Tell me where the market is, and I will work towards that market. If it's in agriculture, construction, whatever it is, housing, tell me where the market is. And that's why import substitution, BUBU, is very important. When you talk about buy Uganda, build Uganda, government is pointing to a market, is presenting themselves and saying, we are going to buy textile. We are going to buy footwear. We are going to buy your food, and so on and so forth. Now, the next question is, how do we prepare for this market that has been identified? So then we begin to work with the Bureau of Standards. Because there are other competitors that are coming into Uganda. Uganda is not, we cannot look away from everyone else. China is here, South Africa is here, Europe is here. The question is, how do we prepare ourselves to engage in the same market that these guys are coming to? The challenge we have today is that Chinese are coming to Uganda today and beating us out of the market in Kisoro. Out of the market, you know, in Kampala here, go to any supermarket here and see what we say. So the question is, how do we prepare these SMEs to come afar and get into a market and be able to compete with everyone else?
I gather you very well, and
so on and so forth.
And the takeaway from Dr. Sawanyana there is how?
So the how is building capacity, because you see, when you look at an MSME, there are internal challenges to the company or enterprise or association or whatever it is, and there are external challenges. Internal, pointing to things to do with, are you able to access credit? Are you prepared well enough? That is not external. That is internal to the firm. Build your capacity to write a bankable project. How do you skill your workers? The customer care you have. All these things are not external. They are internal to the firm, but they can bring down a firm.
Before time runs out on us, Gideon, I need to move to Minister of Finance because we need to hear from them, the guys who hold the money. Sorry for interrupting you there.
Okay.
Yeah, due to time. Mr. Richard Jabo from Minister of Finance, economist. To what extent is the current stimulus informed by evidence? You can tell us, what did you base on to say, okay, UDB and so on?
Thank you very much, Sam. Good afternoon, viewers, ladies and gentlemen. As a ministry or as government, there are two avenues available for us to influence economic outcomes. The first is through monetary policy actions, and to my understanding, I'm very satisfied that the government did whatever was available or whatever was necessary to provide stability in the financial sector, stability in terms of continuation of loans, and making sure that the banks don't suffer non-performing loans, but also the borrowers are able to have their loan amortization periods extended and that sort of thing. So from the monetary policy perspective, I think we are quite prepared. On the fiscal policy side, the actions that have been undertaken, and these were greatly informed by research, by collaborations, by consultations. I can tell you that in the ministry there's an economic recovery unit, response unit for the COVID, which is chaired by at the policy level by the Honorable Minister, at the steering committee level by the Secretary to Treasury. But then there's also an executive committee which was formulated with membership from development partners, from the ministry, from different players, so it was multi-sectoral. Now, the work of that unit basically was to look at proposals from different players. For instance, we looked at proposals from private sector foundation, from UMA, from civil society, entities like Sietini. So many people contributed to the input of that unit. Now that unit came up with proposals which influenced the budget, and you could see clearly that in the budget speech, the minister made several pronouncements. For instance, on the side of tax revenue, you saw there was a lot of tax relief given to farms, and this was intended to not only ensure that farms remain afloat, but also to provide them with some relief, a relief period, actually up to end of September 2020, so that within that time, for instance, we have VAT refunds expedited. We also have payee deferred. You have things like corporate income tax and presumptive tax deferred. And that buffet is supposed to give them some working capital so that they're able to remain sustainable, continue with operations. And then you see on the expenditure side, like you see, government capitalized UDB. 1 trillion shillings is a good start, but I think we are looking into ways into increasing that loan portfolio, in that amount of money in future. So there are so many interventions which you saw in the pronouncements, the budget speech. So as far as I'm concerned, the research, yes, was quite extensive, but that does not mean that it was exhaustive. We still have to look into improving the interventions which have been pronounced, and that will inform the strategy for because now we're beginning to implement NDP3. That will inform the strategy for the coming financial years, especially this financial year 2021, 2022, because you also know we're not just facing current shocks, but there are also other issues. We're going into an election period. We've faced the locust invasion, and there are so many other disruptions. You never know what may come into the future. So we see that there's still scope for further research, and I think this intervention by Eprc right now is timely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard Jaban, for answering my second question, because I was also going to, let's turn off our mics, Mr. Bibb and Dr. Bibb and Gideon. Let's switch off our mics. Thank you for answering my second question. I was going to ask you, so you seem to be happy. Do you need anything from Eprc? But certainly you said you do. Last, let's move on to Dr. Sewanyana, who is our host this afternoon. Dr. Sewanyana, what is it with MSMEs, and the project you are going to embark on the next 3 years with IDRC? What is it with SMEs? Why SMEs?
Thank you so much, Samuel, and thank you so much, viewers. The SMEs, I think members have already highlighted that they account for more than 90% of the enterprises that we have in Uganda. And they do contribute a lot in terms of employment creation. They contribute to growth as well as poverty reduction. And then within the SMEs, which was so obvious when the COVID came in, we saw a lot of people, especially women, who remained a bit unemployed and so on. So it presents an opportunity for us to be able to contribute to this. And when you look at our national statistical systems, we haven't paid a lot of emphasis on the SMEs in terms of data collection. I wish you could be able to give it the kind of attention that we give to the household surveys. It will be very good. So I think what I ask from the Ministry of Finance and the Uganda Bureau of Statistics is for them to be able to really invest more in terms of collecting data. Yes, it's true that most of the interventions were really informed by evidence, but we tried to tease a little bit, and we found that most of the interventions that we talk about are not inclusive. Not everybody is going to benefit out of this, and you see at the end of the day, the money we talk about, which is under UDB and so on, it might benefit more of the large-scale farms. So I think as Eprc, we really want to chip in and do our mandate in terms of providing evidence that is going to guide the government processes. And as we do this project, we intend to look at the macro policy responses that government has put across, and we want to link those macro responses to what is happening at the low level, so that we try to understand what does macro linkages mean in terms of these SMEs. We also want to know whether the support that we are giving is really supporting or hindering the MSMEs. So we we intend to visit the same enterprises for a period of 3 years, for us to be able to move along with them to see how they are really maneuvering during and then after the pandemic. We also know that most of the businesses in Uganda, they don't really last. The mortality rate is very high. So we want to see whether also COVID is going to contribute to a higher mortality rate for these MSMEs. Then the other thing that we want to really emphasize a lot in this project is the learning agenda. We've noted that most of the government interventions, they do not include that learning agenda. So we want to make sure that we can be able to document and share with the government what we have learned in the process and how best can we improve on the interventions that we put across. And during the process, we are going to be able to interact a lot with our stakeholders, especially those who are in the ecosystem of the MSMEs, to move along with them because they have to provide us with data. And we need to analyze the data that they've given us. So we are going to be able to come to you and talk to you. Don't get tired with us. And we've made it a point that even if COVID continues, this project is going to continue. We are going to find other ways of getting to the guys who are really in the SME.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sewanyana. And in fact, one of the biggest reasons we are here tonight, apart from discussing how SMEs are stressed, is discussing what Dr. Sewanyana has been highlighting there. The study that is coming on for the next 3 years, conducted by Eprc and the International Development Research Center on the impact of COVID-19 on business enterprise in Uganda. And the point there is to have evidence to inform policy measures and strategies to mitigate socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 on this group, MSMEs. So they are going to come. Please, as you say, don't get tired of them. Thank you so much, my panel. The time doesn't allow us to discuss everything we want. We now want to move on to the launch of the project that Dr. Sewanyana has been speaking about. But first, I will invite her, Doctor, to come and invite the guest of honor, if they are here. Yes. And the guest of honor is Dr. Joshua Mutabi, Commissioner of Processing and Marketing, Minister of Trade. Dr. Sewanyana.
Thank you so much, Samuel, and thank you so much, Dr. Mutambi, for representing the minister. I think when we were organizing this workshop, we forgot that the primaries were going on. So our apologies for ambushing the ministry, but I think what we are doing here is so key to your ministry. And what I did not put across, that we are setting up a steering committee, which is going to be chaired by the Ministry of Trade, to ensure that this project really remains on the right path. And we do encourage you as Eprc normally, we emphasize that we do engage government in a constructive manner, but our evidence will never be influenced by the ministries. So we want to really maintain that independence and objectivity, and we do believe that when we provide the reliable evidence, it will be able to move the country forward. And I wish to invite you now to represent the Minister of Trade, Madam Amelia Chiambade, and address us as well as launching the project. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your introduction. And thank you, fellow colleagues, the panelists. distinguished guests, let me put, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you. As Dr. Sewanyana has said, definitely you know the season we are in. So the minister has asked me to represent her, but she's very happy with the program, and she's with us right now. So on behalf of the government of Uganda, these are her words. I'm very pleased to join you at this e-conference on MSME's resilience and recovery in the face of COVID-19. And this e-conference touches upon an important topic as the novel COVID-19 pandemic has evolved both into a health and an economic crisis for developing countries, including Uganda. We are all aware that some jobs have been lost. Business and liquidity have dried up, and some have closed up, as the panelist, Mr. Badagawa, has said. But government has not been sitting and watching. It has done its best to protect the citizens. And some measures or interventions have also been put in place to support the recovery process. Some MSMEs have taken up the opportunities and have adopted the ICT and digital tools to continue with their operations. Of course, we know majority faced challenges. More research is being done by the academia to accelerate this development with the support from government and development partners. We are all looking at digitalization, transformation. This, what we are facing now, demonstrates the commitment and builds on the strong partnerships that this government has built between research, academia, and policy making. Micro, small, and medium enterprises are important economic engines of this country and world over. They contribute to the economic growth, poverty eradication, and generate employment and livelihood opportunities, especially for women, youth, and other vulnerable groups. Unfortunately, these MSMEs are enduring the most of the economic slowdown inflicted by this pandemic. Therefore, there is no better time to harness evidence to guide decision-making to salvage the many distressed businesses. In particular, there is need for evidence on the impact of the pandemic on MSMEs in different economic sectors. There is also need for advisory on policy measures that the government of Uganda can put in place to support MSMEs during and after pandemic. We also need to learn from encouraging stories of resilience, in particular on how some MSMEs have continued to stay afloat during these hard times. Going forward, as a ministry, it is prudent that we leverage on the evidence that the project we are launching here today on the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19 on business enterprises in Uganda, from mitigation to the promotion of post-pandemic resiliency, will generate. The project resonates very well with the mandate of the Ministry of Trade on building and sustaining businesses, in particular, fostering the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda policy. Ladies and gentlemen, at the time when the world is moving from the emergency response to the recovery phase to the COVID-19 pandemic, this project being launched here will help to highlight specific challenges with the facts faced by MSMEs in Uganda. If past economic shocks are any guide, the effects of the COVID-19 crisis may linger, constraining global trade, tourism, and hampering remittances, flows,
and bringing uncertainties in foreign direct investment and domestic credit in longer terms. Therefore, it is critical to ensure sustained policy support, tailor-made with actionable targets for MSMEs that are largely vulnerable to ensure job recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope a job-rich recovery from the pandemic. The project identifies for us specific gaps, challenges, and opportunities will guide our policy responses in supporting MSMEs over the short, medium, and long term. I would like to thank the Economic Policy Research Center for inviting the ministry to this launch. And in addition, I also would like to thank the International Development Research Center, IDRC, for its timely financial support to this country to carry out this activity. As a ministry, we look forward to working closely with Eprc and development partners on this project and hope for the key tangible outcomes that will steer the country further in attaining MSME's resilience and full recovery beyond the pandemic. I therefore wish to officially launch this project. The project is now officially launched. Congratulations for God and my country.
Thank you very much. Mr. Joshua Mutabi, Commissioner Processing and Marketing, Minister of Trade and Cooperatives and Industry. So there, henceforth, the program or the project of the 3-year research to make sure that policymakers from now on will have information on which they will base their decisions has started, so to speak. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us on this e-conference. All of you have been here, but especially all of you have been out there joining us. I hope you had some useful things from this conference, but most importantly, government is going to have information on which to base decisions to intervene for MSMEs. For NTV Uganda, I am signing out now. Back to the studio. We have Honorable Kenneth Esiangu, MP Soroti County. Please wave. Welcome, Honorable. And we have Honorable Bategeka Lawrence, MP Hoima Municipality. Please wave. I remember you, I think you're in Eprc, so you are in the right place. Welcome, Honorable. So, questions for our panelists? Oh. Okay, well, let's listen to the honorables. I know you want them to speak, but they want to ask first. We are still live on Zoom, I'm told. So let's keep composed. Let's take a mic to Honorable Bategeka for your submission, Honorable.
Thank you very much, moderator, and let me thank the Eprc and IDRC for this project. I welcome it to get evidence, some of which we're already observing, the behavior of banks following COVID-19. The banks have eluded micro, small, and medium enterprises. They are hardly giving them money, and prices have plummeted, but we welcome the evidence. I would have wanted to hear more, and especially now addressing my question to the official from Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, on the context within which micro, small, and medium enterprises operate. The context, and we could as well say global context, because we're talking about a global pandemic which has exposed the weaknesses of globalization. Countries are now inward looking, and I think I have heard it from many of the presenters. Countries are inward looking. We were used to an open economy system. Now we don't know how to behave as a country, and a semi-closed or even closed type of economic system. When I listened to the official from Ministry of Finance, he was talking about stabilization. I think we have an ideological disorientation challenge with broadly two competing paradigms. And the first paradigm is that markets work. That is the one they have lectured to us. Stabilize prices, stabilize, focus on inflation at any cost. At any cost. The cost of achieving that inflation low, keeping it low, we need to investigate it more. We heard the official from Ministry of Finance talking about monetary policy perspectives, a limited role of the state, high interest rates to contain inflation, high domestic borrowing, high cost of servicing domestic borrowing, even high tax rates on these enterprises we are talking about, which, or in my view, that paradigm is not in consonance with the employment creation and focus on micro and small and medium enterprises. And yet, we are trying to work within that context to address the challenges these enterprises are meeting. Because the objective of macroeconomic policy has remained stabilization, control inflation at any cost. And I would have wanted to hear something about shifting the objective of macroeconomic policy to employment generation, which I have not. And I pray that that one features seriously in the coming research, employment generation, because that's what puts these enterprises we are talking about, micro, small scale, and medium enterprises, in focus so that they create the jobs. And even it is the role of the state. And the cost of credit, availability of credit to these SMEs, access to external markets, as Mr. Badagawa has talked about, and what we should be producing as a country, for whom and how. Focus on production of traditional, or call them tradable goods. Address the liquidity. When I checked what the World Bank has for SMEs, that money can hardly even be accessed by the SMEs in Uganda the way we define them. The small, employing less than 4 people, 4 or less, medium, micro employing 49 people. They don't. And I don't know whether UDB is getting money from this World Bank window to lend, and what are the institutional arrangements, liquidity and skills. These are the key. We want to really, if we are going to operate within the existing global economic paradigm, which may not have leeway to change, what is it we should be doing to work within that paradigm and focus on employment generation beyond macroeconomic stabilization? Sometimes we engage in what we should not be engaging in as a country: domestic borrowing, excessive domestic borrowing, which is definitely not auguring well for the life of these enterprises. So I want to hear more about that. Can we, of course, some countries worked within the similar environment, but still made it. Malaysia, Indonesia, and all these others. How did they do it? Why did they focus on agriculture? I heard UDB talking about industrialization. Why haven't we done it up to now? And agriculture, why haven't we done it? Producing 20 million bags of million bags of coffee for export. What are the strategies? What are we doing? Or we are just leaving everything to the whims of the markets? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I guess Honorable had a first set of questions in there. Let's take those first, and then we will come back. So maybe I start with Mr. Jabo from Finance.
Thank you very much, Honorable. We actually, I perceive that we are from the same school of thought. Maybe just to give clarity from where you started, with all due respect, what I was saying is government has come up with clear tax measures, and these tax measures are at a cost, and they benefit the SMEs. We're not saying that we are going to increase taxes. Actually, we are saying that we are deferring some taxes. For instance, when you talk about payee, we know that there's a lot of loss of jobs, and even some people are taking pay cuts. And we are saying that this payee, we can defer it up until a certain time, maybe September. That was a pronouncement in the budget speech. We're also saying, for instance, that there are other deferments like corporate income tax, like presumptive tax. There's also prioritization of payment of VAT refunds. These are interventions which are saying from the tax policy perspective are in place. I'm not saying that they are sufficient and they are comprehensive enough. We're saying there is still room to explore those, and that's why the research, the evidence that Eprc will come up with should inform even the future interventions in terms of ensuring that SMEs in future, because Dr. here was saying that many SMEs have there's a high mortality rate. They don't even reach the 5th year, for instance, of the so in the future there will be new SMEs coming up, but we have to be consistent in terms of evidence-based policy measures.
Sorry for intervention. I want to hear something specific on domestic borrowing, which is crowding out these SMEs.
On domestic borrowing, of course, domestic borrowing is a strategy for financing the budget. And yes, we agree that when there is a domestic borrowing, it will crowd out the private sector. So the strategy for the future, and that's why I was saying right now, from the standpoint that we are in, we can inform future budget strategies. And I say that right now, we're at the stage where we are designing the budget strategy for financial year 2021, 2022. One of the proposals would be, in my opinion, to limit domestic borrowing so that the banks are able to extend credit to the private sector. But you see, also commercial banks are very wise. Their main motivation is to generate profit for their shareholders. That is why the interventions of government now increasingly are going to UDB. And we are saying let UDB increase its capacity to lend, because hitherto they have not had sufficient money. UDB is getting more credit lines from different development partners. Government is putting in more money. So we want to strengthen the capacity of UDB. Because if you leave all these interventions to the private commercial banks, they are going to buy government paper, because government paper is safe. But the SMEs, they'll say these SMEs are folding, they are not sustainable. So in terms of strategy, those are the interventions. We strengthen UDB to make sure that it has the right capacity and techniques to be able to lend even at a cheaper cost, because cost of credit is another constraint to SMEs. We're also saying that in this time, can we extend the amortization periods, the periods within which SMEs can pay back their loans, so that they have more, they have more liquidity on their hands to ensure that there is sustainability of their jobs, to ensure that they also improve on productivity processes. Honorable, you talked about survival of SMEs. SMEs need to be able to, like Dr. Badaga was talking about, they need to be able to access markets. So research should inform where the market is, where the market potential lies. SMEs need to be able to access cheap credit. They actually need to formalize. There is no bank which is going to lend to an informal entity. So I think when we're saying that about 80% of the SMEs are informal, this is something that as a country we need to address. We need to encourage formalization of SMEs. I'm very glad the Minister of Trade is here because they have a powerful directorate for SMEs. This is where policy interventions need to be coming to the fore. So with this particular project, these are the kind of things we expect to be seeing so that they inform interventions of government. And government is really committed because right now government is looking how do we put this money to the best use in terms of ensuring that we improve, according to the NDP3 which we're implementing, we improve the household incomes, we also improve livelihoods because households really are the SMEs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone of the panelists want to take, yes, Mr. Badaga.
Thank you, moderator, and thanks so much, Honorable, for those insights. Really, for me, I think the whole point is about building linkages. Linkages and partnerships, both within government, so that agriculture knows what trade is doing, trade knows what East African community is doing, and foreign affairs and so on. Today, I think we still have a challenge. So much so that even when you mention you have a strategic export program, it looks like it's domiciled only in the Ministry of Trade and Ministry of Agriculture. When you mention the priority crops, they don't speak to the strategic export program and so on and so forth. Within the private sector, we also have the same challenge. Is the private sector supporting the private sector? Are we building linkages within and amongst the private sector? Today at PSFU, we are talking about a lead farm model. Lead farm in a sense that we need to emphasize market-driven production. Because to us that is very important. For so long a time, we have been emphasizing product-driven marketing. What we are doing now is to make sure that we have pull factors, because people like the big farms that we know about, especially for instance, in the oil sector, edible oils, they understand the market. Construction sector, they understand the market, the big farms. But then there are those people that you want to expose to the market who do not understand the market, who are not brought together, the producer groups. We need to organize our producer groups to be able to engage markets through a lead farm, because the lead farm understands the standards. The lead farm understands the orders, to meet the orders, the volumes, the quality of the product, how soon it must be in the market, and so on and so forth. They are more awake to that than the SMEs that we look to, especially in agriculture, in animal husbandry, and so on and so forth. So to me, I think it's very important, moderator, that we begin to emphasize the lead farm structure. And I'm happy the theme in the Ministry of Finance, we have worked with the Ministry of Finance, I think over the last five years. If you look at the budget themes, they're actually emphasizing agro-led industrialization, because that's where the jobs are. If you're going to add value, you want to look at sectors that are going to create wealth. And that is agriculture. I was not happy when tourism was pushed aside, but this is where the wealth is, because these are the biggest value chains we have in the country. If you are talking about creating opportunities for the youth, opportunities for the women, and so on and so forth, who are in crafts industry, who are textile, and so on and so forth, these are the sectors that spell wealth for this country. So jobs, output, growth in terms of GDP, we cannot run away from those. And the strengthening of the value chain in these sectors is dependent on how we strengthen the linkages within the private sector. The banks are here. Talk to the SMEs. Why are SMEs risky? Why can't they come to the financing institution? And I'm happy again, within the banking sector, every bank is actually speaking to SME banking. They are inviting the private sector for, come and let us know where the problems are. They are training, they are doing financial literacy trainings and so on and so on. And this is the way to go. This is how we can build linkages within and amongst ourselves as the private sector.
Thank you very much. I had private sector in private sector. Not this time, not government to Yambe. Yeah. That also is important. However, private and private, that's important. Dr. Bib, the Honorable said something to ask a question. He asked a question to UDB. You want to answer that?
If I can remember, thank you, moderator. I think the issue was around industrialization agriculture, and he's saying, what have we done? I think something like that. But I think my colleague from the ministry has said something. I think the process of capitalization is ongoing. Of course, in the past, it has limited us a bit, but we have been supporting industries. Only that this COVID thing has amplified the whole process. So, and I think some 2-3 weeks back, you saw us advertising the paper. Because you see, we have tried to do outreach program, and you see some of these SMEs are not coming up. So what we decided to do is to go and put it in the papers. We are using other medias. We are even using banks which have branches like Post Bank, which is also a government bank, to approach these people so that we have access to these SMEs. And I think, as Mr. Badegawa has said, SMEs is not just about financing. Capacity is a big issue, capacity building. So we have even designed a program for business advisory. We do the due diligence on you. We see the weakness. Is it managerial? Is it innovation? Is it what? Then we attach somebody to advise you, take you over the business. They should also learn how to manage businesses under crisis. People, that is adaptation and innovation. Because these things are going to, this one is going to disappear, another one is going to come. Let me give you a good example where we learned from northern Nigeria. There was a place there with a very good trade. But these people, these are people who used to trade, come up to Abuja, then they go to the northern part. But the roads were very bad, potholes. Now thugs used to waylay, because they know these people go back with a lot of money. Thugs used to sit and waylay them when they are going back and rob them. But these people, these small people gathered together and said, why can't we collect money and hire policemen to monitor that area where they rob us? So they collected small money, and these people protected them. Then some insurance companies said, hey, this seems there's opportunity for insurance. Then they came up with an insurance facility for that. So innovation and creativity is also important on the part of SSC as we try to support them. Thank you.
Very well said. Before we take I hope the final round of questions, Dr. Sonia. Tomorrow there will be 5 Zoom sessions. That is day 2 of this engagement. Tomorrow, so please log on and join the conversation, and keep tweeting. It's important that the engagement is holistic, because now we're using E for that matter. Okay, I have been warned that we need to wind up, so you enjoy your refreshments. We'll take one question. Wow. Okay, we'll take those 3 questions, guys. Bear with me. Honorable Brief.
Thank you, Sam. And I'm going to be very brief. My question goes to the Ministry of Finance. The biggest challenge that medium, small, and the MSMEs face is access to cheap credit. And you know, this is a very scarce resource in the country that has been exacerbated by high domestic borrowing. But that aside, COVID-19 donations have come into the country. And I wanted to know what rationale the ministry is using for the utilization of this money. First of all, the information is very scarce, and we don't know which areas you are targeting in economy to support with these donations. Because at the end of the day, the impact must be felt. My thinking would be targeting these medium and small-term enterprises as one of the areas to re-energize the economy. Two is the issue of tax holidays. Don't you think this is the time we get rid of this now that the country is suffering, and then we embark on resource mobilization? Some of these tax holidays are hurting, and now it's more worse with the COVID-19. What is your take on that? Thank you very much.
Very good. We take two from my colleagues, Busura, sharp to the point, and
COVID money, one small thing. When is the ministry bringing that to Parliament for appropriation?
Honorable,
are you just going to spend?
Honorable, you hijacked me. Let's move to Bernard. We had you, Honorable. Sharp to the point.
Thanks, Samuel, for the opportunity. My question goes to Mr. Is it Dr. Abibi?
Abibi.
Yeah. So my question goes to Dr. Abibi Francis. Now, I mean, it's true that UDB has been undercapitalized for many years. I think from as far back when I was still in school. But the question is, I mean, does UDB actually have the capacity to absorb 1 trillion shillings overnight and get it across more than 1,000 businesses without investing its own capacity to handle such money? I mean, is UDB being treated like an overfed calf?
Okay. Finally, Ojek from New Vision.
Thank you. To the Minister of Finance, is it not possible to waive taxes for the SMEs? Say, after 2 years or 3, they have survived and they have some income. Can you not waive the taxes for them to enable them survive? Because if they have that income and you tax it, then they are like to collapse. Ghana is proposing something like that. Then the other thing also, many companies have these tax areas, which is burdening them. And they say it's only the Minister of Finance which can pronounce itself. Because now companies don't have capital. And these tax areas are in the books. The other thing is that can Eprc with this study the President's program of supporting various youth groups, this Emyoga, I think something Emyoga, so that there's more evidence into these programs. I think those are a lot of SMEs scattered all over the country.
Thank you. Ojek, that's our last set of questions. They are all cascaded at the Ministry of Finance. So you have the floor. After you, we'll invite Dr. Sawanyana again as a host to close.
Thank you very much. I think being in Minister of Finance, you have to be prepared for for any shock. Okay, but Honorable, thank you very much for your submission. On the COVID-19 donations, I have very limited information. However, there was a pronouncement in the budget speech that they will not be taxed. The donations which come in, they will not be charged any duties. So that one is a pronouncement and it's already a commitment in writing. So, and then, Honorable also asked, when is the ministry bringing that money to Parliament for appropriation? I think that one I don't have authority to. Yeah. On tax holidays, yes, there's been a lot of evidence. I know Setini has done sufficient, a lot of research in this area. I know World Bank has done a lot of research, World Economic Forum. There's a plethora of information on tax holidays. And it points to the fact that many investors actually don't base their investment decisions on the provision of tax incentives. But then, on the other hand, there's also a school of thought where it depends on which kind of, country specific. Some tax incentives work, and these can be country specific. So it's an issue which I think EPRC has been conducting some studies on, but I think for certain sectors, we may actually need specific tailor-made incentives. But generally, on the whole, I think government is also buying into the idea that we should limit the issue of tax incentives and tax holidays. Then there was another question on SMEs, that can't we waive taxes for 2 years? And I think this one really is something which is, the economists like saying empirical, something like that. What we can do, let the relevance of this project that has been launched, it will study all of these issues and give us, as a ministry, as government, evidence on which options we can pursue. And on the strength of the options which have been presented, government can then make policy pronouncements and pursue those. So these are things which I think we are going to be pushing to EPRC to give us evidence, and they will determine the actions that can be taken. And then finally, the issue of how many companies have tax arrears, but these arrears are not being waived. I think we really need to go and really study the pronouncements in the budget speech. There are waivers which have been provided. For instance, sometimes when there are penalties and interest, up to July 2020, these things have been waived for companies which had those arrears, as a way of ensuring that SMEs still have adequate working capital provisions, at least in terms of waivers. I'm sure that tax arrears, I'm sure those waivers have been made. So let us go back into those government. The challenge we have many times is information, but I'm telling you that provision has already been made.
Very good. I think the last question was to UDB. There was before Mr. Bibb comes in, there was something on groups and Miyoga, correct? Finance. Then we come to you, Mr. Bibb. Yeah, it was yours. No, it's for
finance.
Sorry, I missed that. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Dr. Sonia, there you go.
Thank you so much, Martin. And it's because we do not have really enough time, but we are going to really interrogate the interventions that have been done so far for us to be able to, where possible, we need to propose corrective measures. And that's why I said, because some of them are really sensitive, I said that the Ministry of Trade, which is going to be in the lead, you need to really be prepared, okay, to receive evidence from us, okay, and then we should really be open and present this evidence so that we can really be able to move our country forward, okay? Yeah.
Okay, let's take the last answer on UDB.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, which I think you wanted to. In terms of capacity, I think it's something we have been building, and right now we have enough capacity to use this money. And even we are building to stand as a DFI for the country. So we are even trying to build it further and make sure that some of these projects, which I think are not being manned, but we want to build ourselves like a DFI elsewhere. In some countries, infrastructure projects are under DFIs. Most of these big projects are under DFIs. So we are building that capacity. And apart from that, we're also using what we call intermediated lending to Postbank, which also has the same objective as UDB for the working for the government interest. So we have also used that bank post-bank to go deep into areas where we feel maybe we can't reach, but we have used that. But when we use them under same terms and conditions. If the issue is to lend at 12%, we have also asked them, we have agreed with them and said you also lend it at that much. And look for the same things we are looking, development impact in terms of how this project you are financing, how many jobs can it create? How much foreign exchange, if it is export-oriented, is it going to generate? So we have agreed on the terms and conditions. So it will just be to develop their capacity so that we work together as a government entity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bibb. Dr. Sawanyan, I'm told even the Zoom we have to sign out in 4 minutes, so we invite you to close this session. You want to do it from there? That's okay.
Via TV and also virtually. We can't take you for granted. We do thank you so much for your time. Thank you, thank you. And we look forward to working with you. We shall be knocking at your doors to request for information. And we have also signed some MOUs with some relevant MDS as well as private sector. So, Mr. Badagawa, I still have your letter, and we have to come to you so that you can sign this. So I thank you so much for joining us. I thank the moderator. Where is he? I thank the moderator Samuel for the moderating this. I thank the NTV for the work well done. Thank you so much, and may God bless you. And I wish you journey mercies wherever you have to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's not abandon our masks. This animal called COVID is still around.